Hello. It is somewhat late in the evening, and I do not like to turn on the lights overhead. I, I mostly prefer kind of this more ambient, like side lighting. So do excuse the and natural light. I do love that as well. So do excuse the sort of odd glare coming forward and the imminent darkness around. But yeah, I wanted to kind of talk in brevity about the lesser ritual of the pentagram, in particular the lesser banishing ritual, and on that note, banishing a bit more in general. So, this is kind of like not an overview, of course, of the practice of the pentagram. That is something that is incredibly plentiful. If you want to find it, it is probably one of the easiest to find, like, things out there, and I'm not going to beat anyone over the head with like another step by step of it. I also want to not necessarily get into kind of like the commonly discussed aspects of it, of like it crystallizes the aura, is something I hear somewhat often, things such as that, which, while true, like again, this is kind of the surface level knowledge. I wanted to kind of think about banishing as a concept itself, just very briefly, and sort of how that comes into play. So while I'm not going to, like I said, beat you over the head with like the basics of it, I do think it's good to have kind of like an idea of where I'm coming from for it. So of course we reference the Golden Dawn text for the actual instruction of some of the uses of the pentagram as they were originally laid out by like Regardi's book. Here we have three. This is on page 57. Like, if you have this specific copy, and yeah, the first one we have is as a form of prayer. The banishing can be done in the evening, so that is one, a form of prayer. The next is as a protection against impure magnetisms. The banishing ritual can be used to get rid of obsessing or disturbing thoughts. And then lastly, it can be used as an exercise in concentration. And the latter, the concentration one, since that one is a bit more obscure, or not obscure, but like a bit less direct, I will touch briefly on that. That is kind of the doing it in one's mind, doing it in the astral body. So, what's interesting about this is there are three things listed. Only one kind of directly touches on banishing. In fact, the first method is a form of prayer. And I've been thinking about this a lot with banishing in general as a concept, because we are, if you take the psychological model, we are kind of like clearing our minds, you could say. If you take the more incorporeal, like spiritual model, we are cleaning a space, banishing it of unwanted energies or spirits. That space happens to be the aura in some respects as well. This is something often touched on, even if it's also, if you're doing other practices, the ritual space. But if you are just doing this as your daily practice, it can be considered the aura, the kind of this thing about us. And this is all fine and good. Like, these are great things, but it I feel like downplays to a degree to define it just as such. It downplays it to a degree, like the power that something such as banishing unwanted influence from the aura can have. So I was thinking about this, I was discussing this a couple of days ago, I would say, and I was thinking about this sort of in the analogy of, have you ever seen one of those really rusty cast irons? I've looked at cast iron restoration videos before. That's sort of what I'm bringing up here. Those really rusty cast irons where they clear out the rust and they turn it into something that is usable. I think, kind of through my own personal uses of it over the years and my own personal feelings and changes that I've witnessed like within myself, I think that in a lot of ways you could liken sort of the effect it has on us to that cleaning of like a cast iron, or even like whenever they clear barnacles off, like I believe like injured whales or something of that nature. There's something to do with barnacles. I do not know exactly how that works. If you do, feel free to let me know below. But you know, we go through life. We go through life, as these embodied beings, as these things within bodies, within a world full of other bodies. And by like the aspect of that, you sort of like get this aggregate of like living. You get this sort of, both psychologically, physically, spiritually as well. You go outside on a day where like the let's say like smog, for example, or the pollution happens to not be the best. You may feel ill the next day. Similarly, we have kind of like these spiritual aggregates by virtue of existing, and moving about both consciously and unconsciously, like in this physical reality. And I think especially now with like things like the internet, television before that, the internet now, and the very insane pace of most people's lives, like I think, you could easily state that like this aggregation of things about us, these things like within, like both within us psychologically and like within our aura, within our bodies even, it's builds up at quite a rapid pace. And by banishing, we are perhaps not the body per se, but like from, the mind, the soul, to that degree, we're like that cast iron. We are scraping away the unwanted rust so that we can transform ourselves into a conduit for energy, for power, for exacting kind of like our will moving forward. You could say the will of the cast iron in this case, I guess, is to make food. I use mine for baking, so I guess I would say mine is for baking bread, but in a similar way, like that, you have to clear out the aggregate rust of that pan, so that it can function as a tool for what it is a tool for. And in this sort of case, like it kind of fits because we are with like cookware, we are kind of channeling the energy of heat, of fire, to create a transformation. And magic is very much the same thing. Daily living kind of is very much the same thing. I've been reading, forgive me, here it is. I've been reading this recently, The Heart of Yoga, because I've gotten more interested in kind of like yoga as well, like researching it, I would say. And they even mention like here that, let me find, this is what started making me, this mixed with like discussing banishing made me think about making this video. So we see that, a further meaning of the word yoga is to attain what was previously unattainable. The starting point for this thought is that there is something that we are today unable to do. When we find the means of bringing that desire into action, that step is yoga. In fact, every change is yoga. But we are really only able to direct, our desires properly toward the change we want if we are not being weighed down by this aggregate, both like aggregate matter and like aggregate like psycho spiritual whatever the hell being alive feels like sometimes. And so yeah, this was somewhat rambly, but like while banishing can be seen as like clearing a space, like there's a lot of power in that in and of itself, because compare, I would say, that to the average person who has no interest in these things, or worse yet, has a very low level or like low ability for like introspection. The inability kind of, they discuss like, they talk about brain rot, that's something people talk about a lot nowadays, the inability to sit silently with one's thoughts. Consider the aggregation that person is kind of bearing the weight of versus the simple practice of this. And put in that light, banishing is sort of the most magical thing you can do. It's sort of the most transformative thing you can do if you do nothing else during like your life on this planet but have a consistent practice of banishing. I'd say a consistent practice of like meditation as well. I'd perhaps say these two things go hand in hand with one another, especially with like some of the meditations that you can see. Like, I think Vajrasattva, kind of in this regard, gives a very kind of not banishing per se, but like that same sense of like purifying one's like self. But this is unrelated to anything at all. I would say banishing, and then this video is not about meditation, but meditation as well. If there's one thing you would do, um, doing that is kind of one of the most powerful things you could perform, even if you do nothing else. And yeah, I kind of want to, close on the classics here. A lot of books. I have a big stack of books right next to this computer, which is helpful, because I do like the reference there. So, I would like to kind of close on the classic Crowley statement regarding this. Um, Those who regard this ritual as a mere device to invoke or banish spirits are unworthy to possess it. Properly understood, it is the medicine of metals and the stone of the wise. And yeah, for me, this is from book 4. Yeah, that was really it. Let me know what you thought, I guess, regarding this. If this is too rambly, perhaps interesting. I don't know. Any thoughts on the LBRP as a ritual or other forms of banishing as well? If you have a different preference whenever it comes to this, any thoughts on kind of the inverse of this, invoking, and what sort of place that might have in this kind of concept, I guess you would say, this perhaps grandiose description of banishing. Feel free to let me know, but otherwise, I do hope the best for all of you. Thank you.